The wheels are only ever driven by an electric motor, and that means that we can control the engine that's generating the electricity separately to the driving speed and the acceleration. But we've also added another technology, which is active noise cancellation. So very similar to the headphones that you use on the aeroplane, we have a speaker in the luggage room of the car that will play the inverse noise to the engine and cancel it out. So when you're driving around the city, the engine can start and stop, and you won't even notice it's happening.
Cost increases for council and mental health round approaches. Good morning, Samuel O'Brien in the southeast with ABC News. The South Australian government has signed a $40 million deal to secure diesel supplies amid the ongoing uncertainty of war in Iran. Under the arrangement with fuel supplier IOR, the government will buy and store 10 million litres of diesel at Port Bonython. Premier Peter Malinauskas says it means the state will have an extra 4 days worth of diesel reserve.
This is not an everyday transaction. This is a very unique investment on behalf of the state government. We've never done something like this before, and we're doing it for a reason. We've got no guarantees around what happens in the future, and we just want to prepare for the worst case scenario.
SA opposition leader Ashton Hearn says the Liberal Party has been calling for a strategic reserve and is pleased the government has come to the table with a deal.
It's exactly what a smart government should be doing, because we know that farmers in particular, but our state more broadly, they can't run off the smell of an oily rag, and making sure that we do have a strategic diesel reserve for the future is the right thing to do.
The Wattle Range Council expects its costs to rise by as much as $800,000 as a result of the Iran conflict. Oliver Brown has more.
A report to be tabled at this week's council meeting estimates the increased costs the council will bear over the next financial year. The council expects to spend an extra $330,000 on diesel to run its plant and equipment if diesel costs stay at $2.50 per litre. Resealing project costs could increase by $127,000 following a 30% rise in bitumen prices since the start of the conflict. Waste management costs could also rise by about $160,000, while works on the Southern Ports Highway may balloon out by as much as $200,000.
The United Firefighters Union says the Regional Fire Service needs more money to ensure communities are safe. The ABC obtained a confidential review of the Metropolitan Fire Service, which found 80% of regional firefighters believe their equipment and stations aren't fit for purpose, and they're not efficiently trained. It adds that training requests are often denied over cost, and regional operations risk being completely dysfunctional. UFU Secretary Peter Russell says the MFS has taken positive steps, but needs a significant funding boost from the state government, which hasn't occurred.
If the government does not seriously reconsider the funding for emergency services, there will eventually be a catastrophic event that could have been prevented.
In a statement, Emergency Services Minister Rhiannon Pearce declined to comment directly on the review, but says the government is supporting firefighters through pay rises and by rolling out new appliances. An MFS spokesperson says more than half the report's recommendations have been progressed or implemented, and a further review of training needs will begin this year. Robe Council is considering moving one of its coastal walking trails as the community continues to battle the impacts of erosion. Aj Gannison reports.
Since the trail between the town's Obelisk and West Beach car parks was resurfaced in 2017, erosion has undercut the trail. Sinkholes have formed and surface deterioration has increased. Councillors will vote on Wednesday night about sending two options for the trail's relocation out for community feedback. Both options would move the trail back from the cliff, future-proofing it against erosion. The council says while the project would move the primary trail away from at-risk areas, safe access to viewing platforms and lookouts would be kept where possible.
A 39-year-old man will remain in custody as he awaits sentencing for threatening to share nude images of his ex-partner. Josh Bryan reports.
The man, who cannot be named for legal reasons, appeared via video link in the Mount Gambier Magistrates Court yesterday for threatening to distribute invasive images and failing to comply with bail agreements. During sentencing submissions, the prosecution told the court that in August last year, the man sent multiple 1-cent bank transfers to his victim with a message threatening to share sexually explicit images of her. The defense told the court the man never intended to distribute the content and had wanted his victim to contact him. Magistrate Carly Schultz said she would reserve her sentence until June.
A university student says a global hacking incident has added to strain caused by the recent merger of two South Australian universities. The international learning management software Canvas, used by various universities, was hacked last week, and some students are still unable to access course materials or complete assignments. Adelaide University student Bailey Fry says the software security breach is adding to stress from the merger and says students deserve better.
It's just been really poorly managed from top to bottom, and everyone's still kind of figuring out things from the merger, and this just kind of adds to it. It's just really disappointing coming from like a place that calls himself like a top 80 university in the world.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers will today hand down a budget he's describing as his most ambitious yet. Political reporter Adam Langenberg has more.
Housing is at the centrepiece, with the budget set to include changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax, despite repeated election promises not to tinker with either measure. Treasurer Jim Chalmers has promised to address generational inequality, but also exercise spending restraint at a time of global uncertainty.
This is our most responsible budget yet, and our most ambitious.
The budget does not project a return to surplus over the next 4 years, but in figures released overnight, the government says it will contain smaller deficits than previously forecast.
Thousands of aged care patients are being left stranded in hospitals, with new figures revealing a dramatic increase in about 6 months. Here's National Health reporter Stephanie Dalzell.
Data provided by the states and territories shows there were almost 3,300 aged care patients stranded in hospitals between February and April, compared to about 2,500 in September. These patients are medically fit for discharge, but remain in hospital because there's nowhere suitable to go. New South Wales Health Minister Ryan Park has called on the Commonwealth to take action.
It's a terrible situation for them and their dignity.
A federal government spokesperson pointed to a recently announced $3 billion aged care package with a promise to build an extra 5,000 beds a year.
Researchers at Adelaide University say the state government's response to the algal bloom highlights failings in the effectiveness of current climate policy. In a study published in Nature Sustainability, the researchers outlined how longer-term thinking is needed when it comes to climate frameworks. The study was informed by the government's algal bloom response. Associate Professor and report co-author Anya Kortaba says current measures aren't grappling with the profound uncertainty of climate risks.
Our system has not been ready for the scale of this event and for the types of impacts on communities and ecosystems that we've basically encountered.
Mount Gambier's historic road cycling race will go ahead after a late influx of registrations over the weekend. Organisers of the annual 100-mile classic considered cancelling the 89th running of the race due to low entry numbers. However, they decided to press on after further entries were submitted. Mount Gambier Cycling Club President John Cramwell says while it's a relief, he isn't sure how long the event can last.
We've just got to hope that people will then step up and say, well, we can do this, but it is getting harder and harder road racing in Australia because of legislation, traffic management costs, things like that are all adding up.
A 34-year-old woman has pleaded guilty in the Mount Gambier Magistrates Court to 4 counts of ill-treating an animal. Akala Pamela Jane Bonney appeared in court yesterday, accused of ill-treating 3 dogs, which all had body scores of 2 out of 9. A healthy dog has a body score of 5. Miss Bonney was also ordered to forfeit the dogs, which are currently in a shelter, so they can be adopted by new owners. The case will return to court in July. There are limited takeaways for South Australia from the federal budget. State political reporter Thomas Kelsall explains.
Long-awaited Commonwealth funding for a Greater Adelaide freight bypass or a new Aboriginal cultural centre on North Terrace appear to be missing from this year's budget, which will see more than $17 billion in federal money directed towards South Australia. Nearly $216 million will be spent this financial year and next to keep the Wireless Steelworks running through administration. There'll also be more than $230 million over 10 years for supplementary local road funding, $77 million for a comprehensive cancer centre in Adelaide, and $800,000 a year to keep the 2 giant pandas at Adelaide Zoo.
The head of a national alliance of rural healthcare providers says the budget fails to address systemic issues faced by regional Australians. $25 billion has been allocated to public hospitals, with an additional $1.8 billion over 5 years to keep urgent care clinics running long term. But National Rural Health Alliance Chief Executive Susie Teagan says specific gaps remain in regional healthcare that the budget does not solve.
All these urban programs, they're fantastic. Medicare bulk billing, urgent care clinics, but most of those are in urban centres, and the persistent gaps in access to services and workforce remain unaddressed in this budget.
The federal government's long-awaited response to an inquiry calling for a full ban on gambling ads was tabled yesterday, prompting accusations the government was trying to bury the document on Budget Day. Alliance for Gambling Reform advocate Mark Kempster has slammed the government's response to the Murphy report.
I've got to tell my son why we can't watch Collingwood live on TV because I'm afraid of having to see gambling ads and looking after my own mental health. I feel like the government's completely turned their back on me and everyone else is going through harm.
If you need support, you can call Gambling Help Online on 1800 858 858 or Lifeline on 13 11 14. The new medical director for Doctors Health SA says she wants to prioritise regional GP wellbeing. Medical educator Dr. Adelaide Boylan says GP practices have around 1,500 patients on their books at any given time and often don't prioritise their own health. She says the not-for-profit organisation will deliver outreach services to regional SA to help address the problem.
Doctors can find it harder to seek medical help because of concerns about confidentiality, so they're worried that their peers and colleagues might perceive that they're not fit to do the job. This issue is a particular problem for doctors in regional and remote areas because they're working with the doctors in that area.
The City of Mount Gambier says roadworks which will block access to the Valley Lake are needed to prevent further damage. Davison Drive, which connects Bay Road to the Valley Lake, will be closed during weekdays for the next 6 weeks while road resealing takes place. Road access to the Valley Lake precinct will be closed during the week but reopen for the weekends. City Council Infrastructure General Manager Barbara Sinofskis says the work has been timed to avoid busy periods.
We're going through and just fixing it so that we can just improve the functionality of the road and try and avoid any future reconstruction costs to that site because it's a favourite tourism destination, but it's also a well-used site for our community.
In breaking news this morning, the South Australian Labor government will introduce legislation to remove the ban on fracking in the southeast. In a press release, Energy and Mining Minister Tom Koutsantonis says the Energy Resources Amendment Bill will be introduced into State Parliament next week. Hydraulic fracture stimulation for gas is currently permitted across the state, except in the southeast. A study has found a new hospice facility in Mount Gambier would be viable despite concerns around staffing and funding. Sam Bradbrook has more.
The report, authored by the former University of South Australia Department of Rural Health, analysed the need and viability for a dedicated hospice facility in the region. It found there was a community need for the facility and that models used in other areas provided a framework for how it could run. But it also noted finding enough qualified staff to operate the facility would be a challenge, as well as establishment and ongoing costs. The facility starting with a smaller number of beds to meet staffing requirements before growing staff numbers and early fundraising to ensure operating capacity may be needed if a hospice is to be established.
A southeast man's been arrested and charged with child exploitation material offences. Investigators from SA Police and the Australian Federal Police's JSET task force searched a residence yesterday following an investigation into child exploitation material. A 53-year-old man's been arrested and charged with producing, possessing and disseminating child exploitation material. Numerous electronic devices have been seized for analysis. The man's been bailed to appear in court in July. A study has found manually recharging Australia's aquifers could help maintain water levels. Manually recharging aquifers involves capturing surface water and placing it directly into aquifers, mimicking the natural process of rainfall regeneration. The Flinders University research found that policy limitations are the main reason why the practice isn't widespread. Lead author Dr. Konstantin Seidel says the technology is available.
But it is that sort of governance implementation which is the barrier, particularly in regards to who owns the water, right? You take the water, you put the water underground. What stops your neighbor from just pumping that water out of the ground when they haven't paid for putting it in the ground in the first place?
The Kingston District Council has released its draft annual business plan for public consultation. Josh Bryan reports.
The council has confirmed its plans to continue with its fixed charge rating system introduced last year, proposing a 6.86% overall rate increase. It says the council is targeting an operating deficit of $2.47 million, pointing to the depreciation of assets as the major cause for losses. Deficits are also expected to continue until the 2034-35 financial year. The council says it's not planning on any new significant asset projects, with spending focused on road renewals and community safety. The draft plan is open for public comment until the 5th of June, with an information session at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday the 26th of May.
The Australian Mobile Telecommunications Association says it welcomes the federal government's commitment to amend the Telecommunications Act in Tuesday's budget. The government also promised to streamline approvals for telecommunications infrastructure, such as towers. Mobile infrastructure consultant Matt Evans says councils are waiting an average of 211 days for approvals, hampering investment in regional areas.
Just a 10% improvement in that would likely deliver a 4% uplift in telecommunications investment. And what that would do would be to deliver between 150 and 200 additional mobile sites nationally each year.
And the Country Fire Service has appointed a volunteer firefighter of more than 30 years as its first ever chaplain. Jim Keach is an ordained Christian minister who's previously served with the CFS's in-house counselling program. He'll now be on call for the agency's 13,000 plus volunteers. Mr. Keach says people of all faiths are welcome to meet with him.
We would just sit there and talk about it. Are you able to sleep? Do you eat okay? Do you not eat okay? Sort of all of the really practical stuff. And then at some stage or another, the conversation might get around to what I just experienced. What does that mean as far as my life is concerned?
The South Australian government is defending its decision to end a moratorium on gas fracking in the state's southeast. Josh Bryan reports.
The moratorium, introduced in 2018, was supposed to end in 2028. However, the state government says it will introduce a bill to end it before then. Community members who campaigned for the moratorium, including Kalangadoo farmer Dave Smith, say they're frustrated with the decision.
If any politician does the work that I've done, they would realise that this is a dangerous procedure and it should not happen.
Primary Industries Minister Claire Scriven says she's confident the legislation will pass.
One Nation and the Liberals say that they're pro-gas. They will have an opportunity to demonstrate whether they're serious about that.
The legislation will need the support of other parties in the upper house for it to pass.
Mount Gambier local Brett Machado was one of about 200 people at last night's country cabinet to voice their opposition to the plan. He says that he'd expected the government to further embrace renewable energy.
I thought we'd moved on from this. I thought renewable energy was really taking a forefront with the Labor government. Gas is kind of off in the back burner, I think. It's not competitive with renewable energy.
A McKell Institute report is warning South Australia's planning laws, which treat gas as the default for homes, are quickly becoming outdated. From October, new housing developments that choose to connect to gas will be required to pay the full cost up front, after previously being absorbed across network bills. The report estimates the changes could cost new builds an average of $4,500 up front. Executive Director Hannah McLeod says gas is rarely cost-effective for households, with many already looking at alternatives.
About 60% of South Australian households are still connecting to gas, but that's falling at about a bit over 5% a year. People are going to look at it and go, nah, it's just not worth it for us to pay that extra money to be connected to gas.
The state government says the Planning and Design Code does not require gas infrastructure, and developers and home buyers decide whether gas connections are included in new homes. It says it remains committed to a fully operational gas network, and there are no policies in South Australia that encourage or incentivise customers to reduce or discontinue using gas. The federal opposition leader's budget reply has outlined a migration crackdown that's drawn sharp criticism from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. Political reporter Lexi Junowick has the details.
Angus Taylor's proposal pledges to deliver one of the biggest cuts to immigration in Australian history and tie migration to housing construction on a one-to-one basis. Mr Taylor hasn't provided a precise figure of what the Coalition's new net migration target will be, other than below 200,000. He's also promising to bar non-Australian citizens from the NDIS and 17 different welfare programs. In a statement, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre says Mr Taylor's budget reply is the clearest sign yet that the Coalition has abandoned migrants, calling it inflammatory and desperate.
The director of the Forestry Centre of Excellence says he's looking forward to seeing what a new facility will do for the future of the industry in the region. The brand new $16 million facility was officially opened by Premier Peter Malinauskas yesterday. It was created to support industry by encouraging innovation, better education and improving sustainability. Professor Jeff Morrell says he's excited for the future of the centre.
People should feel like they can come in this centre and we help them and we work with their problems and we solve them. If we can do that, that's success. I see the centre growing a little bit. I see another building, I hope, with a little more capacity than we have now. We're in a growth phase.
The Deputy Group CEO of the Disability Trust says there will be no changes to services or programs at Bedford's Mount Gambier site. The state government announced last month more than $2 million in funding for the Disability Trust to buy the mill to avoid it being liquidated. Matthew McIntyre says the process to save the Mount Gambier location has been complex, but he's glad to see it included.
Our primary focus was to try and create a secure future for the staff here at Mount Gambier, and we had that as at front of mind the whole way through. So to get to the point where we are today is a milestone, and we're now looking about what that next chapter looks like.
After this, there is no turning back. You sip the red can, the story ends. You sip the black can, you enter dreamland, and I show you just how good the truth can taste. Max Taste Challenge.
Organisers are hopeful the Limestone Coast Football Netball League's upcoming mental health round next Saturday will encourage people involved in local clubs to speak up. The Mount Gambier Suicide Prevention Network and Luke Thompson put the initiative together. Mr Thompson says it's important to keep the conversation going.
Different people go through the doors, and obviously everyone's dealing with their own stuff, so if you can turn your football netball club into, a safe space for everyone, then, everyone's winning. And it's definitely something that's picked up over the last few years.
League Chair Kurt Slavin says players will wear armbands, posters will share mental health messaging, and medals will be presented to the most resilient players in the under-17s.
Mental health affects everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, and I think it's just important that we reach out, and by exposing this on this particular day, we'll go a long way to helping people understand and reach out.
A Mount Gambier-born track and field athlete will head to the United States to continue her professional dream. Layla Croker, who participates in the heptathlon, will sign with the University of Arizona to compete in the US college athletics competition. She hopes the move overseas will help her improve and compete at the highest level. She says it's been a long journey from starting little athletics in Mount Gambier.
I always think about it, especially when I go home. I always make the time to go back to where Little Ass was. I train there when I come home. So yeah, it's really awesome just to compare that and just, I still love training down there.
ABC News.
Give me that happy wash.
Scratch-free guarantee.
Make me feel like a limousine. Happy wash, happy car at OTR.